Hello, my name's Chris Bryant. I'm the Minister for the Arts, Creative Industries and Tourism. And this is First Draft, the podcast that champions the creative industries. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Legg, the director of Tate Liverpool. Today, I am joined, very excitingly, by Helen Legg, who is the director of Tate Liverpool. Now, the photo of you on the Tate website is in front of I'm guessing it's a Bridget Riley.
It is a Bridget Riley.
Fan of Bridget Riley?
I am a fan of Bridget Riley and a lot of other artists as well. I heard the artist Lubaina Himid speak about how important her work was for her quite early on and how she encountered the work at Tate Britain, and it shimmered in front of her. This heat was rising from it. And I love that kind of impact of more senior figures on someone like Lubaina.
Now, explain to me how one ends up being director of Tate Liverpool. Well, did you at the age of 6, did you go, you know what I really want to do is I want to be in charge of a major museum or gallery in this country. I want to curate art. I want to make sure that people, or what?
No, I mean, I don't think I knew what a museum director was when I was 6 years old.
But you do now, obviously.
I think I know. How did I get here? I think I put my interest in culture down to the fact that I was taught to read very, very early on, preschool. My mum taught me to read, and my dad used to take my sister and I to the local library every weekend, and it kind of opened up a whole world. We didn't really go to art museums and galleries when I was a child, and I do think that visual literacy that those institutions can bring is incredibly important for children as well. But, giving access to books to all children is so cheap, so valuable, so life-changing. So I think that was the important first step. And then obviously from school I went on to university. And I went to a Scottish university to do English and history. St Andrews. And I didn't realise until I got there, but the Scottish system requires you to take 3 subjects, not 2. Yeah. So I did art history on a bit of a whim. I thought it would be interesting, right. Didn't know it. I thought it would be new. I would learn something I didn't know. And I also thought it would be a relatively easy subject and I could concentrate on the things I really wanted to do.
Right.
But everything changed quite swiftly because I fell in love with it and ended up concentrating on that. Still didn't know you could be a museum director, even after I'd done a degree in the history of art. Or at least I didn't know you could specialise in modern and contemporary. And I knew I didn't want to work in a heritage museum. That wasn't my interest.
We'll come on to that in a moment.
And I went off. I worked for Boots for a couple of years on their graduate trainee programme. Knew that wasn't for me, but I still didn't know what to do. And one day in a gallery, stumbled across a brochure for an MA at the Royal College of Art, curating contemporary art. Really fantastic course. Thought, this is it. Did that. And amassed great kind of cultural capital through those experiences, through that kind of incredible education that I benefited from. And I think that set me off. And from there, it was really about working as an invigilator and then working as an assistant curator, director.
But you kind of decided by then you've done a bit of management training as well, obviously with the Boots course.
Yeah.
So and you had your interest in art, and in particular contemporary art, and so that was so obviously if suddenly there was a vacancy at the National Gallery, you'd say no.
I think I would. I wouldn't. I mean, my path's shifting now. No. I'm sure the National Gallery isn't beating a path to my door right now, but I think I'm open to the world of museums now in a way that I probably wasn't earlier when I was working in smaller visual arts organisations. So never say never. But what I really love is working with living artists.
Right. So I want to go back to the course the History of Art course, because this is going to be a wrong statistic, so I will be excoriated by somebody at some point, but I think it's right that there's only like 5 schools in the country that do History of Art A-level or something like that.
I mean, I certainly didn't do it at A-level, didn't know what it was. I know that there's been a recent scheme that was being advertised by the Courtauld, which was about taking a history of art A-level out to, to young individuals across the country who wanted to study it, who didn't have access in schools. I mean, you're right. I don't think it's something that many schools offer, and you can learn so much from art history.
So I don't know what the art history courses are like, but when I did English at university, there was a canon, the canon of English literature, which is, Dickens and Chaucer and Milton and so on and Blake. And so, and everybody had to learn the canon, and you were allowed to do a few other things as well. I'm guessing that there's a similar debate about what the history of art should look at, because you could just do, well, obviously you've got to do all the old masters, and you've got to do Turner, and you've got Constable, and you're allowed a few others.
I mean, the art history degree I did was very canonical. So it started with the history of art by, the story of art by Ernst Gombrich, and Renaissance sculpture and painting, but that was 30 years ago. And I think the tradition has been absolutely transformed in that time. So there are really dynamic art historians who have been teaching Black British art or world cultures. So I really think there's a breadth there now that wasn't there perhaps when I did my degree.
I had a great aunt who went to Glasgow School of Art. She was from a sort of posh Glasgow family, so she wasn't allowed to finish the degree because it was thought inappropriate for a young girl to finish a degree. She was left-handed, forced to be right-handed, painted, and she was the person who taught me about the old masters, and Fra Angelico was her favourite, that particular blue that he manages, and so on. I don't want you to sort of... Obviously, it's fine to love contemporary, but I just wonder, does contemporary need to have a bit of old master behind it?
I think artists are always in dialogue with tradition.
Right.
So it might be that they're looking at a specific figure who is important to them, or it might be that they're really consciously rejecting a whole, or unconsciously rejecting a whole tradition.
Right.
So I think this is one of the values of art museums, that dialogue can be held in a single space. You can enter a room where a living artist is placed in conversation with Turner. There are lots of conversations going on with Turner right now.
Because of the anniversary.
Exactly. And I think that's what keeps our art history alive. And it means that we're continually rewriting art history, rethinking it, seeing new things in those works from hundreds of years ago, and they're staying alive because of the work that contemporary artists are doing now.
Right. Now, you were in Bristol for a while, weren't you? How many years? I can't remember.
About 5 or 6 or 7. I can't remember either.
And that wasn't like a big national institution, very different kind of vibe. What were you trying to achieve there?
So I moved from Icon Gallery in Birmingham to become director of Spike Island in Bristol. And Spike Island, it had just had a capital development. It had started life as an artist studio complex. But the previous director had raised the money to install a cafe, improve the galleries, make them more public. So when I took over, it was really about building that public profile, encouraging audiences, and trying to think about how you would make artists in studios work well alongside a public gallery programme. And it was a brilliant challenge. I love being in a building where artists were there all day, every day, making work and talking to you about the things that they were doing. We also had a space, a large space that was dedicated to young students studying for their fine art degree courses at university in Bristol. So there were students there interning with more established artists. Right. There'd been this fantastic history that isn't often enough talked about. Our next door neighbours there were Aardman Studios, producers of Wallace and Gromit.
But you can't go anywhere in Bristol without seeing Wallace or a Gromit.
Absolutely. But there was an absolute, there was a really strong relationship in the early days of Spike Island where sculptors from the studio were producing the models for things like Wallace and Gromit. So I began to work on the gallery program, and we established a reputation for, again, working with younger living artists just at that really interesting moment when those figures had, they'd maybe made a few shows, but they hadn't had a significant solo exhibition that kind of brought it all together and really said to an audience, this is what this person's about, this is what they're trying to do. So we did a number of those shows, and yeah, it was a great time there, and I was sorry to leave, but left it in really capable hands.
And you started in Liverpool in 2018, I think?
I think that's right.
So you've had a few years now, and massive redevelopment change. Just take us through that a bit.
So, I mean, it's been a broken few years because I got there, found my feet in this much larger organisation, closed for the pandemic. So I think I'm probably the only director that has closed the museum twice. So we reopened after the pandemic and then closed the museum for a
the
major...
National Portrait Gallery managed to be closed for redevelopment
exactly.
when the pandemic
Their
happened,
timing was
very,
better
very
than
clever,
ours. So we've closed now. We hope to reopen in 2027. And the building had needed refurbishing for a very, very long time. It opened in 1988. Really interesting moment in British art history because it was one of the first times that one of the major national museums said,
Not just London.
Not just London. We look after this collection for everyone, and therefore we need to take it out. But it was also, I've watched Vox Pops from the time, and journalists are saying to, ordinary Scousers, what do you think of this? And they're really excited and intrigued by, they've come out of a surrealism exhibition, and they're talking about Dali, and they love it. And I think it wasn't a sure thing at that time that people would love a contemporary art museum in their city. And what you see post 88 is this network of galleries, many of them who now work with Tate through something called the Plus Tate programme, about 47 museums and galleries across the whole of the UK. But I think it's funding coming from local authorities that could really see the cultural regeneration that Tate Liverpool brought and wanted to bring that to their cities. But it also develops an audience that is really ready for modern and contemporary art, wants to learn about it, wants access to it, and young people who want to work in it ultimately. So I think it changes the landscape. And I think... Go on.
Well, I was going to agree with you in a way, ferociously. I don't. Have you ever been to Cadaqués in northern eastern Spain? It's where Dali was born, I think, and certainly he left his whole collection to create a museum there. But the whole town, all its tourism is about Dali and surrealism, and you kind of think, oh, is this going to be a bit hokey when you go there? But it's amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. And some of his works are superb. But there's one enormous work there, which is the first painting that understands pixelization. So you can look at it from two different directions and it's two completely different paintings. And that's from, I'm guessing, the 1970s or maybe 1960s even. Quite amazing.
And he's created, presumably he's created the tourism industry in that place.
The tourism industry in Cadaqués and all the restaurants and everything is all about Dali.
Yeah, I can well imagine.
So the creative arts and art and plastic arts, not just performing arts as well, but and museums and galleries can completely transform the economic opportunities of an area, let alone the soul of an area.
Yeah, I think, when Tate Liverpool opened, Liverpool had been really struggling. It was the 1980s. There was high unemployment. There was reputedly a policy of managed decline for the city. And it was Michael Heseltine, actually, who came along and said, this is an incredible world city and we need to do better for it. And one of the, I think he had a huge played a huge part in encouraging Tate, which was at that time looking for a home in the north of England, to open a site in Liverpool. He also encouraged National Museums Liverpool to open a home on the Royal Albert Dock, which is where we're based. This amazing collection of Grade 1 listed buildings, the largest collection in the UK.
Always freezing cold during Labour Party conference when I'm visiting.
Absolutely. Always freezing cold, full stop. And I think it helped the city to reimagine itself, because it had been an industrial city, a port city, and suddenly there was culture. And the local authority will talk now about the fact that the local economy is, or the largest part of the local economy is the visitor economy. And that's absolutely underpinned by, the visitor offer, the cultural offer in the city.
Apparently football as well.
Football's pretty important too, and it was the Liverpool derby last night, so I wish I had been there.
But we were about to talk about, because you're going through a big, change at the moment. So what are you trying to achieve out of that? If I'm honest, I've always felt it's a bit lacking in natural light.
Absolutely,
in your spaces.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we have this amazing site, which is on the River Mersey, on the Royal Albert Dock, incredibly important heritage site.
Yeah.
So, Liverpool, for good or bad, was one of the major British ports. Liverpool was a global city. It was connecting to the rest of the world through Liverpool. I was in Shanghai recently. We took a Tate exhibition out there, and the Shanghai waterfront really mirrors Liverpool's, and it was because those two cities were sailing to each other.
I think when you said for good or bad, I think you're also referring to slavery.
Absolutely.
An important driver of a lot of the wealth at one point in Liverpool,
And few people realise that, you can look out of the window at Tate Liverpool, or you will be able to when we open them up as part of the capital development. You can look out of the window and see the graving dock in which the Brooks ship was built. And the Brooks ship, everyone knows, because it's the ship for which the very famous blueprint was drawn, showing bodies packed in the hold. So it's incredibly important that we start to tell those stories. And for Tate Liverpool, we often talk to these histories, and the artists we work with are often speaking to these histories. So it seems crazy to me that when you're in the gallery, it sometimes feels as though you could be in any art museum anywhere in the world. We're very proud that we're in Liverpool. It's an incredibly important site. We want to connect people to that world around us. It feels a bit like,
or it has felt a bit like just a white space.
Yeah.
And it could be a white space, as you say, anywhere.
Yeah, and but
that's going to change.
It's going to change completely, and it will even be less white moving forward. We're going to introduce a little bit more colour.
Not Millennium Mushroom.
No, definitely not. We've been thinking about the way that people use museums. So again, in 1988, we only really had the Victorian Art Museum to learn from. And they were much more formal, regulated spaces. And post Tate Liverpool, because there was this wave of new galleries across the country, architects and institutions were really thinking about what did visitors want and expect, and how did they want to use their museums. And we know that people want to come with the kids, they want to meet a friend, they want to go into the galleries, but they also want a coffee and a chat, and they want to hang out in social space. So we're building in a lot more space to allow people to do that. We're thinking a lot about the entrance, because we did some really fascinating research early on. And we sought out people who were open to going to museums but didn't come to ours. And we asked them why that was. We tried to uncover why that was. And one young local kid pointed out that, to him, Tate referred to Tate and Lyle, which had been a business in Liverpool. He didn't understand necessarily that it was now a brand associated with art. He associated the buildings on the dock with warehouses, so he put two and two together and assumed it was an old sugar warehouse. Right. So it's clear that we need to do a lot more to communicate that it's a public building. You are absolutely entitled to walk through that door. We want you to, and it's an art building. So when the architects are thinking about opening up. It's not just so that people can see out, but it's also so that people can see in and be drawn in by work that we will place in front of the windows. So we're really changing the way we're going to use the building as well.
Great. And so I don't know how to raise this, but there's a world of people who would say that any attempt to diversify your audience or what you show or anything like that is, it's a hideous word, but is woke.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what it means, but what's your take in that whole space? I
struggle with the word woke because it's been one that's been bandied around, but it's been removed from the original context in which it was first used. I don't really know what people mean when they talk about it now. I think art institutions are incredible places and spaces to hold people from different cultural backgrounds in dialogue with each other. We can tell all kinds of stories through the art that we show, and we're not trying to teach or instruct. We're much more about encouraging people to be open-minded, to ask questions, to develop empathy, to learn about other cultures and other ideas and other ways of being in the world. And really importantly, we are 30% funded by the taxpayers, the public purse, and every British citizen pays into that. So we have a duty to reflect every British citizen in the work that we do.
And isn't it more about taking down barriers? Because not everybody's ever going to visit a museum, though it's striking. I mean, the statistics on how many people do visit a museum or if you're including country houses and things like that as well, and those kind of visitor attractions, it's a phenomenally high number, and even more so for international visitors. But there are barriers, because sometimes a museum, the very word, I don't know whether it means that people think, somebody's going to be dusting off an ancient dagger or something like that. Yeah, exactly. And what's that got to do with my life? So is that the kind of key thing that any museum, especially one that's funded by, as you say, in part by taxpayers' money, has got to address? Yeah,
it's funny. When I thought that I didn't want to work in a heritage museum, it was exactly because I had that perception of I don't want to be dusting old artefacts. I want to do something that is relevant to me now. But we do, we're the most visited art museum outside London in Britain. So us being in Liverpool is incredibly important to create opportunity for young people who live outside the capital to gain access to the National Collection, and we want as many people to come as possible. And we've been experimenting with different ways to kind of get away from that dusty idea of the museum. So before the pandemic or after, I can't now remember, but we hosted an exhibition of the American artist Keith Haring, whose work is very widely known, or it's recognised but not well understood. And he'd made an exhibition in a nightclub in New York. It was a nightclub that was painted, the walls were painted with neon paint, and we recreated that in the exhibition, and we played music with heavy bass. Right. And it was curtained off from the rest of the show, so you could walk in there and dance with the paintings. And people did. And it was incredibly successful for young visitors. Right. So we are always thinking about how do we, protect the artworks, but also encourage people to enjoy it in their own ways.
I remember going to an exhibition of his in Sydney when he was still alive, I think, actually. He died in the 1990s,
Late 80s, was it?
All right. Anyway. And, because there are those sort of barking dogs, aren't there? And sort of...
And the babies, radiant babies.
And sort of tubular people. And, and of course, he was an activist as well, wasn't he? About AIDS and a campaigner on LGBTQ issues as well.
Yeah, we ended the exhibition with footage of... some of the AIDS campaigners' protests in New York. Right. People left the exhibition in tears because there was footage of a particular protest where people took the urns containing the ashes of their loved ones who had died from AIDS and threw it through the fence onto the lawn of the White House. Incredible, moving protest, and I'd never seen that footage before, and Haring was there.
Obviously, a gallery has to make money.
Yep, yeah, we do.
How easy is that?
I mean, it's a challenge right now, because you're talking to the sector all of the time. I think we've struggled from probably over a decade now of relatively flat settlements, and at the same time, inflation has caused problems for organisations like ours and smaller ones, all of the Plus Tate organisations, and the sector's really resilient, I would say, and really imaginative. And I think everybody is constantly trying to uncover new sources of income, maximise the ones that they have. We're certainly thinking about that at Tate all of the time. We already raise about 70% of our own income, but we're looking for new ways to do it. We're touring exhibitions overseas. We're growing membership. We've got the largest membership scheme of any museum in the world, I believe. But it's getting harder and harder. Across the whole of Tate, yeah. And I think, probably what we need to do is to sit down with you and your team and think about how we can come up with new ideas and new ways of funding. And I'm constantly looking at other examples around the world. Yeah. So, in France, there have been some really progressive tax reliefs for philanthropy that have...
Named after the minister, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an idea.
Somebody pointed this out to me. Galadin or something like that. I can't remember his name or her name. Yes, I mean, I think we need to look at all these philanthropy issues about how we incentivise that to the best effect. Yeah. And obviously, the tax reliefs that we've got at the moment are enormously helpful. But, it's been financially tough, I know. And then there's all the capital issues. I think when John Maynard Keynes became the first chair of the Arts Council in the 1940s, he said, "This is great, but it's not going to sort out the capital problems."
Yeah, and I can see even in Liverpool that there will be a string of capital projects coming up very soon. So I think we've got work to do, but I think, as I say, the sector isn't sitting around waiting for government to solve its problems. I think they are working as hard as they can to come up with new ideas.
But you obviously part of your earned income is from shows where you have your permanent collection, which is free. But you have shows that people pay for, and that's the kind of pattern across the whole of Tate. Yeah. I just wonder how you make a decision of, we're going to do this, and you're probably not going, we're going to do this year. You're going, we're going to do this 2027, probably, aren't you? You're making long-term decisions.
Long-term, yeah.
I mean, that must be. Who whispers in your ear saying, we're going to do Keith Haring, or we're going to do Philip Guston, or we're going to do Sonia Boyce, or whatever? I
mean, there's a huge amount of research that lies behind all of those decisions. So me and the curatorial team and the curatorial teams at the other sites are constantly looking to see what other museums are doing internationally. They're following the careers of artists. They're waiting for the moment when we think this artist is doing something really relevant and we need to share it. We're thinking about new ways of interpreting historical figures and when is the appropriate moment to bring somebody back into view. And then the 4 Tate sites, so Liverpool, St Ives and the 2 sites in London, will speak to each other. We're very often coming up with similar ideas, so we have to do battle and decide which of the 4 of us is going to move forwards with something. So it's not that we sit down at one meeting and make those decisions. It's a constant, ongoing conversation.
Right. And if you had to choose your next job, what would that be?
Oh, wow, this is a really tricky one. Do you know what? It's really difficult because I've always worked outside London and I enjoy doing that. I have enjoyed doing that. I think there are tremendous opportunities in our regional arts organisations, and there's tremendous satisfaction to make work in organisations. Well, in London, there's so much competition for audiences' time and attention. Whereas, there were times in Birmingham I would make a show and 4 years later people would be talking to me about that show and how important it was for them. So you can make a real impact on people's lives. However, if you want to remain in the area I work in, so contemporary and modern, I'm not sure where you go after Tate Liverpool.
Well, you just
so
have to
who
stay
knows?
then.
That might be what I've got to do.
What's the next big show?
Well, we are working on the
You're allowed to
reopening
say.
programme in 2027. We haven't shared it publicly yet.
Go
but,
on.
Well, what I will say is that we're going to celebrate culture in the north of England.
Right.
And we're going to show some larger scale immersive works from the collection that until the redevelopment we haven't been able to bring to Liverpool.
Right. So it's all.
So you have to visit us then.
Well, I hope I'm still in post. I mean, arts ministers come and go.
Well, we would
remarkably
really.
frequently.
I mean, we would really like longevity, because that's been part of the problem over the last decade, that we have had too much change in those areas.
If you could tell Keir Starmer that, I'd be very, very grateful.
Okay, I will.
So we're now going to go into kind of some quick fire questions. You've got some questions for me maybe as well. My first question is going to be sculpture or painting?
I thought you might ask me this question, and I was thinking about it. Probably sculpture, but that's because at university I specialised in sculpture. So I feel I know a lot more about the materials, the processes than I probably do about painting. But I think if I'd learnt about painting in the same way, it could flip.
Over to you.
Okay. In one sentence, why does culture matter?
Because it's fundamental to the human condition that we seek to express ourselves, either to ourselves, for ourselves, in a vacuum, or to other people.
Yeah, agreed.
Hurrah! We've won. My next question is about sometimes within the artistic community, there's a little bit of snobbery around photography and architecture.
Oh, that's an interesting choice. I mean, I think photography and film and video, from my generation, I think it's fully incorporated into the visual arts canon. How snobbery in architecture?
Sometimes people think that you're not really an artist unless you've daubed paint on a canvas, or you've physically moulded, ceramics, or you've hammered away at a piece of marble. That's all. Whereas photography, sometimes it's seen as a bit of a Cinderella, and the architects, well, suppose they're sort of, but they're really engaged in commercial work and that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's commercial work and non-commercial work, but I think the media, I think we are fully open to all media, and I might challenge an artist's claim that something was or wasn't art, but I wouldn't do that on the basis of the media it was presented to me in. Okay, super. Which British artist would you most like to see become Prime Minister?
To become Prime Minister? Well, it would have to be a naughty artist, really, which probably takes me to somebody like... no, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to go for a rather obvious option of Anthony Gormley, because I think he has a very clear idea of where the arts stand within the rest of the of our human endeavour.
Yeah.
And in particular, he's very committed around the art for art's sake element. And I get a little bit frustrated with people who say, oh, you've either got to have access or you've got to have excellence. And I want to go, I'm sorry, the best way to have lots and lots of people come into galleries is to have truly excellent art.
I completely agree. It's access to excellence.
Completely. But I have got a Sonia Boyce in my office. which is
She
she's-
could also be great.
Yeah, exactly. And her artwork, which I sort of found in the government art collection, is a big long chart of the 84 greatest black women singers since the 1960s.
Which is a project that started in Liverpool.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Right.
she did it as an education project, I think coming out of possibly, I want to say, Facts.
Right.
And she asked women in the city what black achievement did they recognise, and she found it was musicians. So that's how the project began. I think you've already answered this, but one change for the better you hope to realise during your time as Arts Minister?
The single biggest thing I'd like to be able to achieve is a real long-term capital fund for art. I set this challenge a while ago when I was in a room of big philanthropists and said to them, very, very wealthy people, and I said to them, look, if you think back to the Blair Brown governments, you could probably name 10 or 15 major capital arts investments that are, and buildings that are still iconic today, but they're now 25-year-old, nearly all of them, and they've got a little bit of a problem.
Repair.
So the British Museum is a classic example. The atrium. I remember writing books in the old British Library that was sat in the middle of that courtyard. Now, then the beautiful atrium comes along, but now, of course, all of that is 25 years old and needs a little bit of attention.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Tate Modern's 25th anniversary this year, and that whole generation of galleries that I talked about post Tate Liverpool, they're all becoming a little bit creaky.
It was in the middle of the general election. I went to a dinner in the Turbine Hall, which was a fundraising dinner for Lambda, the drama school, and on the big balcony. So we're all seated down in the kind of bottom bit, and then there's the balcony. And I've forgotten her name. Opera singer sang Visidate from Tosca from the balcony, and it was just absolutely beautiful. Amazing. It was as if the Turbine Hall hadn't really ever been intended to be used for making electricity, and had always really been intended for opera.
Yeah, completely.
Brilliant. Helen Legg, thank you very much.
Thanks, pleasure. It's been really nice talking to you.
You too.